Good morning, everybody. I'll just give us another few minutes for everyone to join. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning on our webinar where we're talking about modernising your tech and driving your organisation's strategy. So just before we get started, to go over some just of the etiquette for the webinar. So just to say that this session is being recorded and the recording will be available afterwards. Please use the Q&A box for any questions that you have for John. We will be having a Q&A part at the end, so please do put those in. We want this session to be as interactive as possible. So send them in throughout the session. Then there's also a chat box for any technical problems or any technical support or general questions that you have. And my colleague Rebecca is in the background, and so she will be keeping an eye on those. And then just to say, please check that your microphone is also on mute. So I'm Joyce Harman, and I'm one of the consultants at Heart Square, and I'm absolutely delighted to have with us today John Eaton from Epilepsy Action. John, just to say a quick hello.
Hello, nice to meet you, everybody. Very happy to be doing this with Heart Square, who we're working with currently on a CRM project, so they've been very helpful to us.
Perfect, thank you, very nice of you to say, John. So really just for those of you, I'm not going to go through this slide in detail, that about Heart Square, really just to say that we work only in the not-for-profit sector and that we are independent of any technologies or technology partners, and working with lots of clients, let's say like John, and other charities, membership bodies and trade associations. So what I wanted to do quickly is just to run a poll, just to get an idea of sort of, who's with us this morning and sort of where you are with potentially any projects that you're looking to do. So if I just launch the poll quickly, so if you could please respond to this, would be great. So what we're looking at is, what are the key challenges you face when you're embarking on a technology project? So if you could just fill those in. Interested to see sort of the different stages or what people's thinking is on this. So thank you, that's coming in. I will just give it another few seconds and then I will share the results with everybody. Definitely looks like at the moment staff time and availability is the one that's winning, which is, I don't think, a surprise to anybody really. Okay, great. So let me just end the poll and then I will share the results with everybody. So yeah, as you can see, staff time and availability is the big one, 75%. And it'll be interesting to see what John's take on that as he goes through his points. And then really, I suppose, next from there is where to start, understanding your requirements, what is it you're doing? Why are you trying to do it? Which kind of then really ties in, I think, with looking at the ones around agreement on the priorities and the focus of the project. They're kind of hand in hand, so that's really interesting, which then I suppose leads me on to my next slide, which is these are the common challenges that we find when we are working on projects. So it's good to see that kind of chiming with the audience that we've got with us today. So the main things that we see really are where there's no clear strategy. It's that you need to do something. Very often a project is being done to fix a problem rather than actually seeing how it fits into the organizational strategy, the bigger picture, what it is that you're trying to do. Siloed working is a really big area. People are very used to working in their own teams, keeping their data in their own systems, and not having a focus on sort of the wider organizational thinking, where people are not involved in the project, or that kind of feeling of a project is being done at people instead of with people is definitely one of the common challenges that we see that comes up an awful lot. Looking at the systems of very often, we do a lot of projects around CRM and websites, and very often what will happen is there is a focus on just, say, for example, the CRM system, and no consideration for where this needs to integrate with, does it need to integrate with finance system, does it need to integrate your website, all the various different things. So just focusing on one thing without, again, that sort of looking the holistic view for the organisation and the systems. Decisions are made on assumptions. This comes up a lot, very often, and I know that John has some views on this as well. Decisions are made on assumptions, and that piece around not engaging with the whole organisation, not asking them what they think or what they need, is a really big challenge, which then has a knock-on effect to whenever you go live with whatever the new system is. You will have a real challenge when it comes to uptake and usage of the new systems. Resourcing, which we saw on the poll, always a big one. For those of you who have been on some of the webinars and training programs with us before, I could talk about resourcing all day long, but resourcing is always a big challenge. It's always underestimated how much time is needed on projects, and also the roles that are required on projects. And then I suppose the final one was really about moving into business as usual, because very often the focus is on getting, you've spent all your time, you've done your requirements, you're getting your systems in place, and you've gone live on your new system, whatever it is, and everybody thinks then that's it, your project stop, and don't really consider how you're going to transition into business as usual, and the challenges around that, and also what new roles you might need, what extra training you might need, all of those kind of things. So these are kind of the common challenges that we see on projects. But enough for me. We're really here to hear from John and the work that he's been doing at Epilepsy Action, which I have to say has been some fantastic work. So I'm going to stop sharing, and then we'll hand over to John.
Thanks, Joyce, and no pressure there with the big build-up. So we'll do our best to create some interesting content for you guys today. I'm just going to try and share in my screen. Can you see that okay, Joyce?
Yeah, so just need to go in presenter mode, and then you're good.
And we can still see that. See the presentation. Fantastic, cool. Okay, so obviously what we're talking about today is how to modernise your tech and drive your organisation's strategy. Just prior to going into some of the detail, I wanted to just quickly give you some background as to who I am and what my journey's been. So my prior experience before joining Epilepsy Action at the beginning of last year was working in digital and marketing agencies. So I've seen an awful lot of digital transformation and change projects go through, but from the point of view of the supplier. And doing it this way around from the client side has been really interesting. My background's included working with a lot of large technology platforms, so CRMs, content management systems, but also in my last role, I did quite a lot of change projects involving brand as well. I think I've got a pretty reasonable level of experience in this area. And if anybody would like to contact me afterwards and sort of build your wider network, I'm really up for that. And so please just drop me a note, and we can be friends virtually or in person. Just to sort of go on to Epilepsy Action. So we sort of talk about Epilepsy Action as being a kind of old man in terms of its heritage. It's 70 years old. We have a lot of long-term supporters, including 9,000 members, many of whom are now pensioners. We have an awful lot of what I call period features within our organisation. So areas of expertise and reputation, which are really, really kind of high quality and well known to us. So this isn't an organisation where absolutely everything is broken and we need to come in with a completely new set of ideas and thinking around our services. We absolutely have to work with what's there and enhance things, and also recognise that even though we are looking at digital transformation, not everybody who we have in our service user mix is able to access the internet themselves. So we've had to do a lot of thinking in that respect. One thing that is a slight challenge for us is that we're used very, very broadly as an information source by a lot of people who are looking for epilepsy information, but we're almost entirely funded by donations from service users and the wider public. So a big issue for us is how do we balance that, the fact that we often our benefit to end service users is the connections that we build for them and the information that we have for them. But equally, we need to monetize that at some point as well, so we can continue to provide those services in the future. In terms of epilepsy as a condition, there's 600,000 people roughly in the UK who have epilepsy. That's 1 in 103 people. But we estimate that if you took a broader view of their wider support network, so their family, friends, and people they work with, so teachers, carers, GPs, their colleagues, the bosses, we're probably talking about an overall audience of around 2 million people who we deal with. And finally, epilepsy is a very complex condition. It's different for everybody. It's not a condition that is necessarily hereditary. It can happen to anybody at any time. And it's very poorly understood by the public in general. So if you talk to most people about epilepsy, they talk to you about flashing lights and seizures. But actually, epilepsy can be a very, very serious condition for a lot of people. So about 1,000 people a year die from epilepsy, which is comparable with some of the sort of better known conditions. And also, what we find is that people who develop epilepsy often have very large impacts on their way of life. So their job can be difficult to get to, their relationships can change, they're not able to drive anymore. So there's a constant issue for us in trying to raise epilepsy's profile amongst all the other health conditions that people talk about and give money to. So just going to go on to our journey. So in late 2019, there was a decision taken to split our all communications department in half and create a new digital division. And I interviewed at Epilepsy Action at the end of January, which is the screen grab there to your right. And I got the job, luckily, which was fantastic. And then I started, I think, on the 5th of March, and then 12 days later, we effectively went into lockdown. So we asked everybody to work from home. And actually, as much as that was very traumatic for the organisation, it was a really good thing from the point of view of digital adoption, because we were so reliant previously on face-to-face activity, whether that be fundraising events or local groups where people got together and talked about their epilepsy, or attending conferences and that sort of thing. So there was a massive take-up in the first half of 2020 on new ways of engaging with our audience online. And towards the end of Q2, we launched our first version of our digital strategy. And within that, we included what we still call the user first mantra. So it's not digital first, because we want to think about what our users need. And as I said, some of them are absolutely not available to go online. So we basically got a mantra where we think about what users will need first and foremost. And then we also think about what we need to achieve in terms of measurable outcomes. But we try and make the service mix right for the user based on what we know about them. I'll come on to users a bit later. So in terms of organisational readiness for digital transformation, there were some challenges. So it was really good. This was an organisation where there was a lot of appetite to become a digital charity. So lots of people who were really interested in helping us to become successful as part of a new department in the organisation. But there were some fundamental misconceptions about how you digitise things. So a lot of people basically saw the digital department's role as driving web traffic to services that they developed. But actually, one of the really critical parts, I think, of digital thinking is working out whether the proposition is right anyway. So we've had to go through a few different challenges like that. Second one, which was really an issue, is that we didn't really understand our end users across the organisation, which I'll come on to a bit later. And as a byproduct of that, there was lots of siloed working, which obviously, as Joyce was saying, is a common factor in a lot of the projects that I've been involved in and Heartsquare have been involved in. And the real impact of that, and I know everyone goes on about siloed working being a bad thing because it's inefficient and all the rest of it, which is true. But I think the big issue for end users is that unless you've got all people pulling in the same direction, you end up with a bit of a sort of weak, tepid, watered down version of what you could offer people. So key thing for us was trying to get everybody to work together so that then we could present one single view of epilepsy action to our service users that was enriched by context of where we believe that they were in their journey with us. So the key question for me when I first came in was where to start, because we've got burning platforms all over the place. We've got redundant platforms as well. And in the end, I made the decision by talking to other senior managers that the places to start were here, really. So our main website, epilepsy.org.uk, is where an awful lot of our traffic goes. And our database is obviously where we keep all of our records of customer interaction. There was problems there. First of all, our main website is built on a legacy system in Drupal, and we weren't able to upgrade it. So we needed to look at how we could adopt a new piece of technology that would future-proof us for changing our online offering moving forward. By the way, apologies for the sound effects if anyone can hear it. My 12-week-old is next door, being very nice at the moment. As a second thing, we weren't able to integrate Drupal with Progress, both systems being legacy. And also there wasn't any way of using, for example, API integrations to go into Progress. So that's even older than Drupal. So to my mind, the sort of most important thing for us to look at, first of all, is how do we create an integrated CMS, CRM experience for most of our supporters? And that basically is borne out via our plan up to the end of 2023. So we've got a few little tactical projects that we're doing. So we did a project earlier this year on employment, because people with epilepsy often have real challenges with employment, particularly if they're already in post, because their role may, for example, involve driving, and all of a sudden they can't drive themselves places. So we put together a toolkit at the start of this year to help people, because we thought that was going to be really important as part of unemployment during the pandemic. The other project we're doing that's tactical is one on emergency epilepsy medication, which again is driven through some of the challenges of the pandemic. And just for anyone who wants to know about that, currently there isn't very good quality training for people to be able to administer emergency epilepsy medication unless you have somebody physically come and do a training session with you, and that has to be under the current guidelines an epilepsy specialist nurse. But obviously with the challenges during the pandemic on the NHS, a lot of specialist nurses have been redeployed to other areas. So we're developing an online course which will enable people to be trained over the internet rather than in person. So that's another thing that we're doing alongside these two larger projects, which are the CRM and the upgrade of our main website. Everything after that, we've kind of made a decision can sort of what we treated as a second phase of priorities. So how did we sort of get to a point where we were driving consensus and adopting change through our organization? So the first thing was that as a quite traditional organization, there was a real challenge to get away from gut feel decision making and base decisions on data. So we did that quite heavily in the first sort of 3 or 4 months I was in post. So we installed a piece of software called Hotjar on our site, which enabled us to see beyond Google Analytics data and see what people were actually doing via real screen recordings. And that was really beneficial for us, because it meant we were able to test assumptions and prove the worth of data on 2 really important projects. So first of all, coronavirus advice page, and then secondly, the relaunch of our coffee and chat service to a virtual offer. So for the coronavirus page, one of the big issues we'd had in the early parts of the pandemic is going back to the lack of awareness about epilepsy. There wasn't specialist information for people with epilepsy in the same way that there were for people with cancer. So, you know, there was ambiguity around whether epilepsy was a condition that would put somebody into a vulnerable status. And there was also a lack of information about access to anti-epilepsy medications and that sort of thing. So as a byproduct of that, our helpline got absolutely swamped in the first couple of weeks after Boris's big announcement about you must stay at home. And as a result of that, we basically repositioned our page to put some of those commonly asked questions towards the top of the page. And also we put on there a timestamp of when the page was last updated. And that moved a lot of people from the helpline back to online, which really eased the pressure on that service. And for coffee and chat, we were aware that a lot of the people who accessed that service were in their 70s and 80s. So we were really concerned before we put that live that it was going to work for people. So one of the things we identified quite quickly was that a lot of people wanted to book multiple sessions at one go. So sending them back through a single form where they could only pick one session was a problem. So we allowed them to pick multiple sessions because of that. And a third area that we started was we started doing cross-departmental monthly reporting, and the reason for that was to try and sort of get some SMART goals baked into our thinking. So make predictions about what we're trying to achieve, do something and measure on what we managed to actually achieve, and then continue to iterate and improve. So that was an important part of embedding some digital thinking quite quickly across the organisation. The next thing that we realised that we needed to do was raise profile, because there was, and this is quite common of a lot of organisations I've worked in, a sort of level of anxiety and suspicion around digital projects, because they're technical, they feel scary, and they tend to go wrong. So one of the things that we've been really careful to do is make sure that we absolutely raise the profile of the projects. So particularly for the CRM project, we've wanted to get people's opinions because we knew that there was a general feeling on the ground that the project wasn't going in the direction that people wanted. So we wanted to basically present back some thoughts that we'd had and encourage a wider debate, and get warts and all opinions back from staff as to what's gone wrong and how we can fix it. We've also been very selective around who we feel should be presenting some of the information. So in this instance here, actually our Chief Exec, Phil, presented to the whole organisation in order to get people to start to participate and engage with us on the project. The next area is to work out how you enable consensus agreements to happen. And again, here, one of the big challenges is people are nervous about getting involved in consensus agreements around technology projects because they're not technology specialists. So what we've done a lot of is again, trying to focus in on non-technical language. So on the right-hand side here is an example of one of the resources that Heartsquare provided us with that was really useful, which was basically to think about what we would need from a future CRM provider on the basis of different attributes that they might have. And the red dots here are basically votes from different people who were part of our vendor selection panel, which was made up of people at SMT level, but also people from the wider organisation. And you can see that the most important thing for us was understanding of our project focus, followed up by different ways of working and supporting maintenance and that sort of thing. So that I think is really important because then people do feel like they've got a stake in a project and they properly engage. The next point on that is that what I've seen in previous roles is that collaboration only goes so far. So what you'll see is people doing things like this around vendor selection, but actually when it comes to writing briefs, they tend to sort of go off and do it themselves. We've tried not to do that. So for the CRM ITT, we involved, I think, everybody in the selection panel, which was I think 7 people, all of our senior management team, which was another 4 or 5 people, and then I think we had around 15 SMEs, so subject matter experts from around the organisation. So you're kind of getting on towards half of the people in the organisation having inputted into that document, which again means that it isn't just one person's project, one person's mission. It's the organisation's project. A key part of collaborative working, obviously, is getting people, before they get to the decision, to engage with you on exercises that help to bring everybody closer together. And because of the pandemic, that was a real challenge. So in the olden days, when everybody was happy to go into offices, you typically see people sat around a whiteboard doing different exercises to try and work out what was important and move things on. We couldn't do that, obviously, because everyone was working from home. So we tried a few different activities, and some of them were terrible, like literally cringeworthily terrible. But actually, you couldn't predict which ones were going to work best. So in the end, looking back on it, I think probably the stuff that was most effective was simple prototyping and planning exercises, where you focus in on users and sort of roughly start to sketch out what things look like. And this was quite important for us in moving away from a culture of sending your requirements over in sort of fairly fully informed Word documents, which removes any opportunity for us to really collaborate with different departments on what they're trying to achieve. So what was the big breakthrough activity for us? What was the thing that allowed us to drive the most momentum? And it was a piece of work that we did back end of this year, and we're still, sorry, back end of last year, and we're still doing this year. So that siloed working, I mentioned earlier on, had a knock-on effect in terms of everybody thinking that their audiences were unique and distinct. And the manifestation of that was that we spoke to 65 people working in our frontline services across the organisation, and identified 113 personas, which basically is a huge amount. And we then took those 113 personas and whittled them down to around 20, having done a little bit of sort of thinking about whether we were talking about the same audiences, but 20 is still an awful lot. So we realised what we needed to do was put this in the hands of a third-party organisation, a creative agency. Who've done an amazing piece of work with us to help us to understand our audiences a lot better. So in terms of personas, we obviously gave our ramblings to a creative agency, and we also gave them the details of 12 of our service users. And we gave them access to all of our analytical tools as well. So Hotjar, Google Analytics, Webmaster Tools, and a few other things, I think. They basically went away for a couple of weeks, gathered loads of data, and then presented us back what they thought we had, which was actually 5 audience groups, altogether much more manageable. And we always sort of wanted the persona work to sit more broadly in the organisation and help us to inform all strategic thinking. The website project was a good project to put it into because it meant that we could have some budget to play with. Actually, getting a project signed off to just understand your audience often feels like a dodgy thing to do. So actually baking it into the website project felt quite a nice way of getting that across the line. And in terms of what they look like, I'm going to run into those in just a second. But to the right-hand side here, you've got a sort of graphic that illustrates what the sort of understanding of people's journey with epilepsy is. So you have a stage of in the dark where people don't know anything. There is after that a set of changing circumstances where they start to adapt to their new circumstances. You then after that hopefully get to a point where you're informed and on with life, which means that you've made adaptations to your life. You may still be having lots of seizures, but to all intents and purposes, you're kind of comfortable with where you're at with your condition. But that informed and on with life and changing circumstances situation can be very cyclical. So over the course of a person's life, that may change many times. And finally, some people will get to a point where epilepsy is no longer a priority. It might be that they no longer have epilepsy, because that is possible, or it might be that they have other conditions and other priorities in their lives that mean that epilepsy is no longer something to think about regularly. So in terms of what those personas look like, as I mentioned, these are the sort of the first 3. So the in the dark persona, the sort of typical start point for in the dark is somebody who's had a first seizure or something that could have been a seizure. And often what that means is somebody's woken up in A&E, they're very confused, and often the first thing they hear is from the on-duty doctor, and they'll say, you've had some sort of seizure, could be a brain tumour, could be epilepsy, we need to book you in with a neurologist to give you a proper diagnosis, which obviously is a massively overwhelming thing. So what you see here is people with all sorts of different emotions. They're scared, they're uncertain, they feel out of their depth, they're nervous, they feel like their life's on pause. And their search activity, which I think is a really important part of developing personas like this, reflects a lack of knowledge about the condition more generally. So it's what are seizures, what is epilepsy, can I drive, what treatment might I be looking at? The other thing that we found with it within the dark, changing circumstances and on with life, is that actually it doesn't really matter whether you are the person directly affected, so i.e. The person with epilepsy, or the family, or somebody in a supporting role. You may well be looking for the same sort of information and the same kind of help that we can offer. So changing circumstances, as I mentioned, is a stage on. So if I take you down, first of all, to the stuff at the bottom, there's the search activity. You'll see there that there's more of an informed set of criteria around that. So it's what are the triggers, what anti-epileptic drugs might I be interested in. There's also stuff in there around life stages. So as I mentioned, changing circumstances isn't necessarily just a change in that person's epilepsy. It could be, for example, that they are informed and on with life, but they're 35 years old and they're a woman and they want to think about having a baby. In which case, they're back in changing circumstances again, because that they want to know how their condition may be affected by some of those life choices. So that's the changing circumstances lot. And then when you move over to informed and on with life, you'll notice here there isn't any search activity, and the reason for that is that we see more of these people engaging with us on social media channels and through our email service. So they're not necessarily actively out there searching for information. The users of our services, often people who turn up at our local groups or virtual groups as they are now. And for them, they're kind of on the watch out a little bit for things that might push them back into changing circumstances. So we saw an awful lot of these people moving back into changing circumstances last year, with things like the pandemic and also with Brexit, because there was at one stage a real concern around access to anti-epilepsy drugs towards the back end of last year, with all the lorries getting stopped, coming in and out of the UK. These people fall into three different groups. So that there is a disengaged group who've used all our services previously and quite frankly don't want to talk to us ever again, because not because they had a bad experience, but because they want to forget about epilepsy and move on with the rest of their lives and try not to be defined by a condition. You have loyalists who think we're absolutely amazing and do all sorts of things for us, from volunteering to fundraising, and advocate our services massively on social media to all of their networks. And then we've got mavericks who support us, other healthcare charities, even other epilepsy charities as well. So these people, the key thing for us is to try and make sure that we stop people from becoming disengaged earlier in the process, and that we do try and convert a lot of them into loyalists, so that they really love us and see the value in advocating our service to future service users. And there's two other groups that we feel are uniquely different to that. So that the first one is parents and guardians of young dependents with epilepsy. So these people are people often who are looking after children with very severe form of epilepsy. So that they will probably need to have understood what impact that might have on their child's educational needs. They're often the people who are banging on teachers' doors saying to make sure that they know about the latest information that's come out. And some of their search activity is very, very, very specific. So it's infantile spasms, explaining seizures to a child. These people are some of our largest supporters, so we need to keep them happy. And the final set of people who are constantly engaging with all of our different service users in different ways is healthcare professionals. So that includes epilepsy specialist nurses, ESNs as we call them, neurologists, GPs, and care home managers. And these people are coming to us, to kind of fill any gaps in their own knowledge. So, for example, are there alternative suppliers for lamotrigine? What are the side effects of sodium valproate? What happens if you have that one that I can't read properly, and alcohol? So they're looking to plug gaps in their own knowledge, but equally they're also looking for things that they can send to their patients, so that they can help themselves after they've had that first appointment. And one of the things that we discovered in doing our persona research was that one of the really key first interactions between healthcare professionals and people with epilepsy is that first trip to go and see a neurologist. So we're thinking about how we can provide better resources that makes that first interaction really, really, really good, and helps them to get the support that they need. So that's the personas. And the really important part of this is it's allowed us to really think more strategically about our organisation. So we did an exercise, for 2 exercises last week. We looked at what proportion we think, this is obviously estimates at the moment because we do know we need to get a new CRM and improve the quality of our data. What percentages do we feel currently, gut feel, our audience sizes are? What percentages do we think that splits out again by service use? Following on from that, what percentage we feel volunteering and knowledge revenue and legacies and that sort of thing falls into it. And it's interesting because you then start to think, well, actually, we need to treat all the audiences slightly differently. So moving on to the next slide, we've also plotted all of our activity we're planning on doing next year, all the key dates, and then we've started to then look at that quarter by quarter through the eyes of different users of different persona groups. So that's been useful in that it's shown us where we've got gaps. So for some personas, we've got big gaps through the year where we haven't got anything currently planned to talk to them about, which obviously isn't good for re-engagement. But there's another issue for us, which is that for some persona groups, we've got a very monotone style. It's very factual. Actually, we do need some highs and lows in the emotional experience to prompt people to interact with us positively. So that was the big breakthrough activity, and these are the 5 lessons learned in the last year. So the first thing I would say is that if you do want to get a big budget signed off, raising the project's profile and aligning it to the important strategic goals of the organisation is vital. If you can do that, you move away from a situation of everybody telling you everything's expensive, because they can see what the value is going to be for the organisation moving forward. To do that, you really need to not be off on your own riding a digital crusade. You need the whole organisation bought in. So to do that, use human-centered concepts to engage those people. Prove your worth through your data. If you can prove that you can use analytics and data to inform decisions and make good decisions, that will really help to build your sort of profile in the organisation and make people confident that you can lead them to success. 4th, don't be afraid to try lots of different things. Some of the things we did really didn't work, and that was actually most important for us because it was useful in knowing that there were some concepts people didn't know, and therefore when we've come to driving the projects moving forward, we're not doing those same mistakes in project. And that final point is, as an ex-agency person, I now realise how critical it is to have the relationships on the ground and people who are going to really help to push the change agenda through. So your first followers in change projects, I think, are the most important people, because then you can start to look a bit less like you're stood on a soapbox telling the whole organisation how it needs to change. Other people can start doing that for you, and that's really important, I think, in starting to change the culture. So those are the 5 takeaways. Happy to take some questions now, but I thought one of the ones to throw open to the group might be, does everybody have an idea of who their first followers are at the moment? Do people know who they're going to be able to go to help activate change on the ground?
Thanks, John. That's a really good question. So yes, anybody, if you can put some comments into the chat. Yeah, John, we've got lots of questions for you. But that's been really interesting. And I love all the, I know I've said it to you before, I love all the work that you've done on personas and the way you've presented them as well. And also that sort of doing out the quarters with all the post-it notes. I think that's a great exercise, if not a little bit frightening to kind of go, oh, wow, we're going to be very busy for the next year. But yeah, that's been brilliant. Thank you. So just to go through the questions. So one of the first ones was, did you put in metrics for the benefits that you wanted to get from the changes that that you're trying to do? So yeah, have you put in any sort of metrics that you're going to be looking at throughout sort of the project and the changes?
So yes, we have, but equally that process of arriving at metrics has been interesting. So going back to activities that really didn't work, one of the ones that we tried was the idea of writing a newspaper front page for the organisation in 5 years' time. So we were basically trying to get everybody to sort of pin their colours to the mast in terms of how many supporters we might have, what sort of organisational change we might have implemented, what that meant for our supporters and what that meant for our turnover. And that really made everybody quite uncomfortable. So we basically did that a couple of times. And I think what we've kind of come to the conclusion of now is that we do need some harder hitting smart objectives, and we're using the personas to inform that for our organisational strategy rewrite, which is going to be done next year, moving from 2023 onwards. But yeah, I think it was an exercise that was useful in that it got everybody talking. But I'd say probably we've started these projects without the firmest of KPIs in place, to be honest, at this stage.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think it's also a really good point, and good for other people to hear as well, about learning from things that didn't work. Because very often nobody wants to admit we tried something and it didn't work, but very often you learn more from the things that didn't work. So it's really good to hear that.
The most annoying thing is I've used that approach before, and it was one of the most useful things I've ever done for some clients. But for some organisations, it just doesn't work. You know, if that's not the way you're minded, then it's not worth sort of pushing people on that same way of working.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely it. You're right. You have to kind of, be aware of the organisation and the culture and how people like to do things, even though sometimes, possibly needs a bit of a change. But yeah, absolutely. One of the other questions that's come in was, how did you get agreement on the priorities for the order of the projects? Because obviously, that roadmap slide that you put up, you're doing a lot. You've got lots of plans. So how did you get the agreement from I suppose from a senior level on the priorities?
So a lot of it was discursive. So, we went around each department and, as I said, to kind of understand their persona priorities. But at the same time, I was talking to the senior managers about what they were trying to achieve and, what their KPIs were and the things that they felt were kind of really going to be breakthrough activities for them to be able to deliver. So that was kind of where the steer came from. And the other thing that helped with that was the data. So, if you looked at that website list, I think probably 90% of the traffic through all those systems is through that main website. So, if we can change that and make some major service improvements there, that should cascade down across the rest of the organisation.
Perfect. And then another question was, and with a comment saying it's a great project. How did this impact on your volunteers and your volunteering strategy?
So the volunteers is an interesting area. So we've had some staff change since the project started. So we've now got a new person who's in control of all of our services division. And one of the things that we identified was that we didn't really have a volunteer strategy. So we had preset ways people could volunteer with us, so they could get involved in setting up local groups and that sort of thing. But actually we realized there was a much bigger opportunity there. So she's currently writing us a volunteer strategy. But one of the things that Anne mentioned was that in the interim, we do need a better, more robust process. So longer term, we want to be able to store volunteer information inside of our CRM. But in the short term, what we've done is we've basically adopted a volunteer management system so that we can ensure that we are onboarding people in the right way. And we've also written some policies around service usage and safeguarding as well. And that's all being cascaded out currently. In relation to the stuff that we're doing with personas, we have engaged some volunteers in some discussions, but we haven't cascaded it back down again yet. But that is part of our plan. So one of the things that Mark McDade, who works with a lot of our groups, does is he has a regular meeting for some volunteers to attend, to speak to people. I know that he's actually chasing me currently to be on one of our future meetings with volunteers to go through this. And in addition to that, all the stuff that we discussed today, we've been presenting back in all staff meetings. So there has been recordings created of those, which have gone to our trustees, I think to some volunteers as well.
Perfect, great. Another question was, what was the reason for splitting comms and digital and the role of each unit?
So the reason for doing it was we, as I mentioned, are a very traditional organisation. So a lot of the kind of period features, as I mentioned, and the things that people think are really good about epilepsy action, was driven from the fact that we used to be covered by something called the information standard, which basically is or was a sort of rubber stamp that we were the place to go to for epilepsy related information, and often that meant that we produced leaflets that would be handed out from the NHS and from other organisations in relation to epilepsy. So the mindset's always been, I think, very much on how do we create written communications, often in print form. We've also previously had a lot of focus on how that ties into PR as well. What we decided was that actually, if you separate those two things out, you won't end up with digital being the poor relation, which is kind of where it was previously. And actually, I think what we're going to probably end up doing moving forward is moving back to that centralised comms department again. But it'll be more equal balance of digital plus communication. But yeah, I think the thinking around it was just to make sure that digital wasn't forgotten about, because as I mentioned, you know, we hadn't really got anybody in the organisation who'd done lots of digital transformation work before.
Perfect, thank you. Another question was, it's great that you've had so many involved in the selection, so I'm guessing this is relating to the partner selection piece, but did you do they all get a vote in the final decision of who to choose? So I suppose, yeah, it's that kind of thing, you know, the level of involve everybody, but then is there too many people on making the decision? So yeah, so are all of those people going to get a vote?
Yeah, so all 7 of those people in the vendor selection committee will get a vote. So we've made that up of not just senior managers, but also of people further down the food chain. And one of the things that we are doing to facilitate that is we're communicating the progress of what we're doing to senior management on regular intervals. So we have a project board meeting we do once a month, which informs our chief exec and deputy chief exec and all the other senior managers of what we're doing and why we're doing it. So, you know, cynically, some people might see that that's us kind of giving them the opportunity to make the decision, but it's really not. You know, we're just keeping them informed. I'm a big believer in RACI modelling. You know, so thinking about how you keep everybody engaged needs to be engaged, so you don't get a sort of sudden, you know, red flag at the end that says you have to make a different decision. So yeah, all 7 of those people have an equally weighted vote. So we'll be making the decision in the CRM project on that basis.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, and I agree that, you know, it's that balance between giving people their say, you know, and it's sort of across the organisation. It does make a difference, and then when people start using the system, they feel like, yeah, they were involved in it rather than it was done at them. Then another question was, have you got any plans to do a review once the changes have been made, you know, to check if you've achieved what you set out to do, and if so, how will you do it?
Yes, that is definitely part of our plan. In terms of how we do it, it sort of depends a little bit on the project timelines, because we're in a unusual situation in some ways that we've got a website and a CRM project going on at the same time. And there's no guarantee both of those things will be in place and we can have a period of business as usual at the same time. So it might be that we will do the website analysis first, because I think that project will like to be finished first. That's looking like it'll be done by the end of next year. And the CRM analysis might be done after that. One of the challenges with the CRM is that we're not entirely sure what we've got currently in terms of quality data. So it might be that actually we need to have that up and running for a little while before we can really tell what the organisational impact is. But yeah, certainly there will be a wrap up at some point to look at all the lessons learned, particularly in relation to the processes that we've been through, to make sure that we learn from any mistakes that we've made.
Yeah, definitely. And as to your point of, yes, you're doing a CRM and a website project at the same time, which is quite a lot for any organisation, which leads on nicely to the next question, which is, as you're doing a lot, did you have any resourcing problems?
Yes. There's 2 different kinds of resourcing problems really. There's the ones that are on the people we needed to engage. So we were very kind of wary of the fact that there may be organisational fatigue at trying to do too much too soon. So we have attempted to stagger these projects so that we're not calling on the same people to disrupt their regular working patterns to be involved in these projects. But that has happened sometimes. So we've done a lot of project planning when we knew that we were going to be running the projects fairly similarly, sort of time frame wise, to try and make sure that we're not overburdening people. But in some cases that has happened. The second issue has been the focus inside of the digital department on what we should be doing, because alongside the project work there is the business as usual work, and what I've really encouraged everybody working on these projects and on the business as usual work to do is to just be really clear with our colleagues around what our priorities are and where we can make the most impact. So we have at times made unpopular decisions where we've just said, I'm sorry, that hasn't got a big enough impact on our service users, and therefore we're not going to do it. And that, people have been a bit upset by that, but I think they understand that, we're trying to deliver something bigger and more strategic that's going to have a bigger impact on the organisation. And the other thing that I found personally is that the switch off from work has been sometimes difficult. So I do quite a lot of running, but at the moment I've got a 12-week-old baby, so not so much at the moment. But in general terms, getting away from my desk for at least a couple of hours a week just to try and switch off has been so important, because it allows you to basically land on the piece of information that ties things together. So for example, the informed and on with life persona, we really struggled with what to call that, because we recognise that someone's position might not be stable. We also didn't want to use the word new normal because we thought it was going to date really quickly. That's probably the best place that we got to. So actually, I came up with informed and on with life on a run and almost fell down some stairs. But it was useful to have had that breakthrough moment.
I like that your commitment to your job, that you'll injure yourself in the way to come up with new ideas. I love it.
Yes, absolutely.
And then we've got one, conscious of time, we've got one final question. So you mentioned when getting buy-in for the big spend to raise the project profile and align the project with strategic goals, how did you achieve this? So yeah, how did you go about that?
So there was a couple of different things. One of the things I had to work out quite quickly was what was the best way of engaging different types of people. So, for example, with senior management on raising profile, we had to make the projects things that were priorities for people who had lots of other things going on. So I'm talking, chief exec and deputy chief exec here. So, I sort of took the view with those guys that we needed to present things, and if there were problems, not pull any punches and be really clear that there was organisational risk, and that we needed to take a different approach. Obviously, working with people like yourselves, where it isn't just us internally banging the drum, has been really helpful. So both Heart Square and our creative agency, Ponderosa, have been really helpful in just presenting some of that stuff back to senior stakeholders and building momentum. But in relation to people in the wider organisation, I think one of the things that we've done really well is give people our time, and not feel as though we're doing that in a rush. So we've attended lots of team meetings, we've had lots of one-to-one meetings with people, we've genuinely listened to what they've got to say, and tried not to present solutions. So one of the books that I read a while ago was Sir Alex Ferguson's book on leading. And he was saying that what a lot of leaders say is you should listen twice as long as you talk, because that's the reason you've got two ears and one mouth. But his view is actually you should talk 20% of the time because you've got two eyes as well. So we've tried to do that, is basically, get everybody to tell us what they thought and then work with them so that it does genuinely feel collaborative. And if everyone's talking about your project, then it does make a difference at senior management level, because people go, oh, we need to be sorting out, because everyone's very excited about the CRM or the website or whatever. So it's an important part of kind of building all that momentum.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's it. It's because it's one of the biggest challenges is buy-in from senior management, which is not a challenge that you have because of the approach and everything that she's taken. But I absolutely agree. If all the staff are talking about the project, it can't be ignored. It has to happen. It has to do. So I think that's a really, really good takeaway. So John, thank you so much. That has been really, really brilliant and really informative. And you know, as I say, you've been doing so much over, you know, the last year or so. And yeah, the fact that, you know, a new baby in the middle of all of that as well, you know, keeping you up at night and trying to do all of these other things. So it's been really useful. So thank you very much for joining us. As I said, the recording will be available. Rebecca will send out the link to that afterwards. And yeah, just again to say thank you for joining us this morning, and thank you very much, John. Really appreciate it.
No problem at all. Thanks a lot, everybody, and hope to catch you some in the future. Cheers.
Thank you. Take care. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.